Thank you for joining us tonight. This is TypeScripting the heck out of model-driven forms. With Daryl LaBar. I've known Daryl for 6 or 7 years. Superstar MVP, amazing developer, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to share with us tonight. So Daryl, please take it away.
Awesome. Go ahead and do that. I did that. Okay, interesting. Little information about me for anyone that cares, but just to kind of go through what tonight's going to be about is I'm going to be kind of just walking through how I set up TypeScript for my projects. So it's going to be, 10 years worth of, or I guess 12 years worth of experience in that space of Dataverse and CRM before that, and model-driven apps, and how I set up the TypeScript for that. And so this is going to be focusing a lot on the setup of the actual NPM and TypeScript, and then even how I set up my own IDE for VS Code. And then finally, at the end of it, some unit testing, which of course I got the unit testing. So just the kind of final at the very end. Oh, this is what we've done. So hopefully it's something that you find interesting. We don't have a very large crowd. I'm going to try to keep track of who's if anyone has their hand raised using the team's hand raising feature, and try to let you ask any questions. But besides that, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at this TypeScript red pill here. So. Yeah, so as I said before, I'm going to be using lots of free tools. One is coming from Magnus over in Europe for Delegatus. So that's the thing that actually generates the TypeScript definitions based on the actual forms. I'll be using that, and then I also have my own little extension on top of that does some other things that, that was written in F#, and I don't know F#, so I kind of created my own post processor for that. But yeah, so the idea is that every single attribute on your forms will be type safe for you for running, and as well as some helpful tools for being able to test form logic locally, and then also barely getting into the web API. And as a caveat here, I'm always switching back and forth to different projects, so I haven't actually set up a brand new JavaScript TypeScript project in a couple of years. So some things may be out of date, and you feel like, why isn't he using that? I probably need to. Feel free to share it with me, but this at least works, and is fairly simple. So I'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing is the kind of the project setup. So we look at this. I'm using NPM, VS Code, and NuGet. So probably the weirdest one is NuGet. That's for C# stuff. Why are we doing this in TypeScript? And the answer is because that's where those tools that actually I'm using to generate the TypeScript definitions actually exist. And hopefully, let's see here. Can I get a raise of thumbs up if you understand what a TypeScript definition is? If no one raises their hand, I better talk about that. Or no one gives me a thumbs up. Okay, I don't see anyone. Okay, so for TypeScript, there are TypeScript definition files. And the TypeScript definition files is what is used by TypeScript to add the typing to the JavaScript, basically. So there's no logic to them. They're not used in the actual generated output. They're not deployed anywhere. They're just used by the TypeScript. I guess it's a transpiler or the compiler. They're just used to enforce the typings when you're typing. So and that's the whole setup for this, is to get all that stuff typed out, so that way when you're coding, you have all your IntelliSense right there, and you don't mess anything up. You don't have to test, hey, did I get the type of this right? Did I get the right attribute value? Did I get the right string? All that kind of silly stuff. So yeah, that's gonna be a major focus of this. I also have switched over to using VS Code from Visual Studio. I think a lot of people are doing that now, especially for the JavaScript TypeScript world. Just so much easier to do. I am going to be using ESLint just to help catch some errors, as well as the prettier plugin for that to automatically format it. I found that very helpful, and keeping everything formatted, because I'm a little OCD. Maybe you are too. But anyway, those are some things that are involving the workstation setup. And this is a little mundane, but I thought maybe I'd share it. This is how I try to set up my my project, my actual file structure for my TypeScript projects. So if you're a consultant like me, I usually have a client name, and then there's the get root. So whatever, if you're using Azure DevOps, whatever that the name is that you get from there. And so again, that's technically not needed, but that's something that I include in there as well. And then if there's like a name for what it actually is, I don't know if it's called CRM or Dataverse or some, if you got some app name itself, I usually put that in next. And then I have usually the plugins in that directory, and also then I have this web directory as well. And again, this is optional, but this is how I do it. That way I can have both plugin files and my web files in the same GitHub project, GitHub directories, but not unnecessarily, but separated still. So that way I can make sure I'm opening up just the actual web resources in VS Code rather than all the plugin solutions and stuff like that. So, and then the final one is again optional here, but I had issues where I had multiple clients, and I think I named the project, the final folder name was like web resource, and so like I had like 3 Visual VS Codes open, and they were all the same. Said this web resource. I couldn't know which one was which by actually like opening it up. So I try to put in a more of a project specific name in there as the final step there. But all optional stuff there, but just something that I found works for me over the years. So I have gone ahead and created a folder here called TS-Heck, just for the funskies, and I'm going to be going ahead and populating this and configuring this. And at the end of the day, we're going to have an actual, hopefully a working unit test and some generated TypeScript in it. So very first thing that you will probably need to do if you haven't already is install TypeScript. That's the command for that, npm install-g if you want it global TypeScript. And then the next one here is something you probably don't have. And this is the NuGet package that I talked about that actually installs the XRM definitely typed exe that is used to generate your type definitions. So if you are an early bound generator, one of the tools I've created in the XRM toolbox, or another early bound generator, just think of it like that. This is the tool that's actually going to generate those types for you. Yeah, and then I have my post processor there, this xdt.post processor that is used to go ahead and take the output from this and then adds some additional features on top of it that I find useful for myself and I've shared with the community. So so I'm going to go ahead and just run those commands just to get us started here. And so you can just see they're not totally crazy here, but in the terminal here, great. I'll go ahead and install that, and I will also install the other one as well. Okay. All right. And all that stuff gets added to the packages folder right below this folder. So those are all the NuGet packages are stored. And then finally, we need to actually go ahead and init our npm project. So it's npm init. And this creates our package.json. So if you're not familiar with npm, this is kind of the thing that will be used to, it's, actually I think I have a slide on it. So let's go through that. Yep. Cool. So this is basically equivalent to the C# packages config file, but for npm projects. So all of your scripts, which are like basically command lines that you've stored that you can just rerun, at the very end, I'll show you to rebuild it. I just run a little script to rebuild to regenerate all my typings in case I wanted to, if I added a new attribute to a form or removed one, I could just regenerate real quickly or just to run a test. Then it also lists all the dependencies that you use, so all the other JavaScript files and JavaScript libraries that are used. There's really not anything there's only one JavaScript library that I actually use that actually gets deployed, and that's my own. But I use Webpack to combine those into a single file, so you don't really actually notice it really. And then also the XRM definitely typed does create some JavaScript files in order to do the web API requests. So anyway, we'll go more into that later, I guess. So, so I'm going to go ahead and start installing all these npm packages, and then I'll go through and talk about it. So that's the whole install for all those things. I'll let that run. So ESLint, if you haven't used it, it's just a static type checker, a static code checker. I'm sorry. So statically, it's analyzing your code and finding any potential bugs. And then there's a couple prettier plugins for it. I don't know if you've used Prettier before. I don't know if there's a better thing out there, but it's very opinionated formatter for your code, and allows you to configure it to give you errors if it's not formatted correctly, and you can just save the file and that will automatically format it for you. I just found it very helpful just to not have to worry about. This is configure this is formatted this way or this is formatted that way. It just seems to make a lot more sense to have that do it for me. So if I'm including that here. Then we have some TypeScript jest that we use for testing and the loader for TypeScript as well. Then I'm using Webpack to package the compiled TypeScript files into the final JS files. And that'll be basically one for each form, as well as maybe a ribbon or another thing like that. So those are the actually PCF files is what I was thinking of, I think. But anyway, I'm using Webpack for that. XRM mock is the testing framework that we'll be using. And then XDT form extensions, that's my library that I have on top of the XRM definitely typed. And then finally here we have the @types. So just how I mentioned earlier that they're the TypeScript definition files, that's what these are. There's no code to them. They're just the definition files for these libraries. And that way you can get a telesense when you're working with those. So I've gone through and installed all of those things. And the next thing to do is to configure well, I guess let's take a look at this too. So all that's done is brought in all this NPM stuff here, and it's added to my dev dependencies, all the NPM packages that I'm referencing. Because we're not actually using NPM to publish things, it really doesn't matter if you use dev dependencies or dependencies. Theoretically, dependencies are what you need when you're actually can I zoom in a little bit more on that? Let's see here. So that a little bit. So the dev dependencies would be stuff that you use locally, and then the actual dependencies is what you actually deploy. But since we aren't deploying it via an NPM, it doesn't really matter for us. So anyway, so let's go ahead and create our TypeScript config JSON. So this is what's going to be used to configure how your TypeScript compiles, basically. So we'll go ahead and run this. All right. So it created us a tsconfig.json, which contains lots of options in here. Lots of options. I hate being on things that are old, and so by default, it's generating 2016 as the version of ECMAScript to use. I'm going to just change it to 2024 because that's, I guess, the way I roll. I will also need to take the output directory. So this is where the actual JavaScript is going to be created at. And so I'm just going to update this to that. Okay, so this is going to be under web resources hex. So hex is just the prefix for the solution. So if your company's ABC, it's ABC, Acme, it's Acme, whatever the actual solution publisher prefix is. And I'll get into it later, but I primarily use the web resource manager in the XRM toolbox to deploy my files. And so that just makes things a little bit easier in that sense. So anyway, that's the output directory. And then the final thing I need to add to it is what files to include. And so I will include, hey, everything that's in the source directory as well as in this typings directory. The typings directory will contain the type definition files. And so it needs that when it's compiling to make sure that everything's type safe. And then the source is the actual source for the TypeScript file. So all right. How are we doing? Feeling okay? Any questions before I can move on to the next stuff? So far, I haven't gotten into too difficult of a thing, hopefully. But yes, there are lots of other options here in the typing section that you may want to enable as well. But those are up to you. And you can spend all day working on them, looking at them, and trying to figure out what we'd like to do. But those are available for you as well under the TypeScript config. Next up is linting. I've already talked about this. The biggest thing to kind of take out of take from this is that there is an auto format and save option in the VS Code. I didn't know about that, and so when I was on a project that had that, it was horrible because every time I type something, oh, it's wrong. Well, it's not an error, programming error. It's an actual type linting error, prettier error, and so I had to manually fix it. And yeah, just being able to push Control Save and just automatically fixes it. It's really really addicting. You also end up saving your file a lot too. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and set up ESLinting for this project. It's run by the npx ESLint init. Okay. So it's going to give us a little bit of a what am I thinking of? A little manager to walk through and and figure out what you want to be. So we're going to use JavaScript. We are going to check syntax and find problems. We are going to use the JavaScript modules for our import-export. We aren't going to use any sort of framework for that, so none of these. And then we do use TypeScript, so yes. And we're going to run not in Node, but we'll run in the browser. And then we have some things that needs to install. Yes, let's go ahead and install those. And we are using npm, so let's go ahead and do that. And it's going to go ahead and start installing everything. And there we go. We've got the ESLint config.mgs. So this is something that's newer. And apparently it's a better way of setting this up. I had enough time on it to figure out how to make it work. I don't know if I did a bad job or a good job, but hey, this is what I found that works. So that's all I can give you. So let's go through here. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to actually import the Prettier plugin and config. So I will go ahead and copy that in. And so this is just referencing those files we imported using npm. Here, cool. And it'll give errors because they're not being used currently, and that's fine. And then the next thing is files to ignore. So this is just files that, hey, I don't care if the Prettier linting on this is wrong, like skip it. And so yeah, things that make sense, like the Webpack. If the JavaScript, I don't care what the JavaScript looks like. I just care what the TypeScript. So that's why we're skipping. Actually, that's a web resource. Webpack is the actual config files that are used to configure the Webpack. So skip those, no modules. So these are all the things just to skip in the linting process. So just the files I care about, basically, is what the idea there is. So cool. And that's fine for now. So those are the ignore files. Next up is our configs and Prettier rules. So in here, you can specify how long do you want your, these are the only config I think that it's available or Prettier. So how long do you want that file, that line length to be? How you want the end of line to work? And then do you want to allow single quotes or not? Tab with trailing commas. So if you're like a 2-tab person, you want to change that to 2 rather than 4. Yeah, trailing comma means you always add a trailing comma each time or only when it's needed. You can configure that. Those are basically the rules for that. And the other thing also included is the JS configs recommended settings. So I believe this goes in order. So anything comes after this overrides what's before it. And then the final thing down here are the rules. So I sometimes use any explicitly, and that by default that isn't allowed. So this is just a rule to say, hey, turn that off. It's still will to say you're not allowed to do implicit any's, but the explicit any is allowed in this. So let me go ahead and bring that in as well into this lovely file. Okay. All right. Also notice that when I did this, all these errors started showing up. And these errors are the Prettier errors. So rather than trying to figure out if I just push Control S, it just automatically formats everything and removes all those errors. So you'll find yourself pushing Control S a lot of times and just fixing your errors and making everything formatted the same way throughout the whole project, which is real nice. Okay, so continuing on. All right, so we got all this stuff set up. Now we're to the point where we can actually start generating our type definitions. And so these type definitions are going to be unique to your actual instance, not to just the Dataverse as a whole or your model-driven apps as a whole. So there is 2 XRM typing libraries out there. There's the XRM definitely typed, and then there's definitely typed. So I'll start with definitely typed first. So definitely typed is the open source library that's kind of started by, I think, Microsoft, but this basically contains type definitions for like every major library in the JavaScript world. And it does have one for XRM, for Dataverse. It doesn't do anything for your actual form. So it doesn't actually catch to say what attributes are on the form, what forms you have, any of that kind of stuff. So it's up to you to handle that. But the good news is there's no generation required. And anytime we're interacting with the actual like page model API, it's great for that because it has all those definitions. And it's used by most projects out there that I've seen. And the XRM mocking testing framework that we'll be using uses that there as well. The XRM definitely typed world it's okay for JavaScript API. I think the definitely typed one is a little bit more It's more people working on it or using it, so I think it's a little more up to date. And this does require generation, but it generates the type-specific form typings. So that's really where you can start utilizing the power of compile time safety checking for that. So that is the XRM definitely typing differentiation here. So before we actually go and run this, we need to actually configure it. So here's an example of there's a config file that sits in the packages directory here. So under that version, content, XRM definitely typed, XRM definitely typed.exe, that config, you actually put in your information you want to use. So the URL, the APN method, and then I'm just using the actual Microsoft MFA app ID and return URL because this is dev and it works. So, and then your username and where you want this to go. So out in this typings XDT folder, and then the entities you want to actually generate. So if you have other entities you want to generate the forms for, you can add them here on a common delimited list. And then where the XRM definitely type querying. So this is the actual logic that's used to query the web API in a type safe manner, where you want that to go, as well as where you want this library to go for that file as well. So those are the config settings that I will be using. And rather than showing that, I'm just gonna those are all the settings. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy that over with this fancy copy command because I watch me type all that stuff in. All right, so that brought in my config settings over. Next up is did I just stop the presentation? I guess I did. Start from slide. There we go. Okay. So the actual XDT generation. So you're going to run the XRM definitely type.exe command there to go ahead and generate that based on the settings that we have. And then optionally, this is what I do in my projects. I have this XDT post processor that I talked about before, and this is what I'm using to take whatever this generates, whatever the XRM definitely type generates, and then it utilizes that to add some additional typings and some additional methods. So, like for example, I hate always having to check whether an attribute exists on the form. I hate having to go get the attribute just so I can set the value. So like one of the simplest things is I added a .set value to the context basically. And so you just give it the name, attribute name, and then the value you're setting to. And if it happens to exist on the form, it sets it. If it doesn't, it doesn't exist on the form. So if you are maybe combining multiple forms with one JavaScript file, one TypeScript file, it just will log a warning message to the console. Hey, this thing doesn't exist, and I'll just move on. You won't get any error because 99 times out of 100 you don't care. And so yeah, that's what we're doing there. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick off this generation for the packages here. So run that config. You'll see that it's going through and generating it for the account and the contact. And nearly done. Done. All right. So you see that it's added a lot to it's added this typings file here. So we have some internal stuff. This is what's being used by other things that it references. And then we have the forms itself. So the account form, if I go and look at this, you get to see your tabs, what the names are. So you don't have to worry about what's the name of this tab, what's the name of that tab. It's automatically set there. Another key thing to kind of point out here is, that's really fat. Let's get a little bit less there. That's too thin. There you go. Is it uses a static strings as the type definitions or as a type. So that says, hey, this type is the string billing, all caps. And so that way you don't need to have like enums or anything else. It is literally a string, and it'll give you the IntelliSense. So is it billing, is it company profile, or whatever the IntelliSense happens to be, without having to hassle with enums or anything like that. So that really nice feature for that in TypeScript if you haven't used that before. So this is stuff that you'd be much more familiar with. Hey, get the address city one, and that will return the attribute as a string type or potentially null. So every single one of these things has been, typed to the actual value it is, an option set, if it's a lookup, hey, is it a system user routine potentially, count contacts, and all that kind of fun stuff. So that's, and then you also have it for the controls as well. So in here, if you want to get the actual control to hide it or show it or whatever, all that's defined in here. So that's what it's gone through and generated and all that stuff. So next thing is let's go ahead and run the post processor. Unless I have anything else I want to show here. Okay. Yeah, this is the stuff that's used for doing the actual API querying stuff too, this XM query. And then this is their type definitions here, this xrm.d.ts. That's the generated TypeScript definitions for the XRM namespace by XRM definitely typed. So those are those files as well as metadata. Yeah, this is what's used for the querying stuff as well. So anyway, that's everything got generated from there. Let's go ahead and run my tool here. And this is all locally, so it's uber fast. And so it creates in here these extensions. So now in the account, it does a couple of things. It first puts all the attributes under one type name. That makes declaring the type of the form much easier in the actual TypeScript when you actually create the form file. So it creates those atop, and then it also will add all the certain types together into a single type. That way you can say, hey, I want to create a method that can be run against any string attribute or any number attribute or whatever type that you care about. And that way you can keep on ensuring that you've got valid typing and you don't have to go through and like type out every single string attribute or whatever. And then if you regenerate it, it automatically get added to it. So yeah, that's all stuff in there. And then we have down here, these are the extensions that I've added to the context. So I'm wrapping the context, and so you can add on change, you can get the value, set the value. Those are the only things that I've added, but then it's really simple there. Yeah, that's another annoying part too, is like adding the on change event handler. Like if it's not on the form, you always have to check for it. And so why don't just do it once and then have the base class go through and handle it or not. If it doesn't exist on the form, you probably intended it to be not that way. Probably it's on a different form. That's fine. So that is those things as well. Okay, cool. So that's what's generated there. All right. Okay, and then so just diving into the web API, I haven't found this as helpful as I thought it would be because it's very easy to get, just a simple, hey, give me this one value from this one entity works. But if you get into some complicated joins or things like that, I just end up using the REST builder in the XRM toolbox from Guido, and then just doing it the non-TypeScript safe way. But if it's simpler, then this does work. And I'll even give you an option of something else to try as well. So by default, this gets generated from what I just did. And I've used it in one project and it worked okay. You could also look at maybe Scott Durow's Dataversify, if you want to look for something that's a little more C-sharpy, if you're a little more familiar with that. So might be a good thing to look at as well. But that is the options for the XRM Web API typing. So just a quick example of what that looks like. In XRM definitely typed, you have this XRM query that you're calling, and then on it has the methods that you want to use. And this is the actual typing of it to say, hey, this is going to be the accounts. Once you give it that, so that's basically like you're from, then you can have the IntelliSense here to say what actual fields do you want to select, what filter do you want to add. Hey, the name equals Katoso. And then your promise is, okay, I'm done. Now I'm going to return a promise that you can then await to get the value of it. So that's how that works. So everything in here is strongly typed, except obviously for the name you're searching for, because that's just what you're searching for. And then this is an example of what it'll look like in Dataversify. I don't have an example for retrieve multiple because there wasn't one on the documentation when I looked at it, but it's going to be pretty much the same thing. There's a client that you're calling, that retrieve, passing in the name, and the ID value that you're looking up, and then the values you want to actually return, and then typing as an opportunity. So yeah, whatever kind of floats your boat, just some options. But hey, I'd probably recommend giving this a try first. That way you don't have to create your typings twice. So just FYI for that, how that works. All right, so we generated types. let's go ahead and actually utilize them. So you've gone through all the hard work of setting everything up, of getting everything generated. Now we need to actually start making use of that time that we spent doing that, right? So the first thing that you should do, if you're using my libraries here, is create a base form. And I've got a base form that I've generated in my libraries, but you need to make sure you have a layer of between me and you, basically, so I can change this and not break you. And so basically all you're doing is saying, hey, this is a form base. It's going to have a context that's a specific context. It's going to have attributes and controls, and those are what those attributes and controls for the form that I create in my extension exe. And then it's an extended base form when you're passing in those values. So this allows you to add any sort of method you want to add at a base form and be able to be utilized anywhere in your projects for all your forms, and whatever else you want to use for that. So that's just why I was just first creating a base form. And then, all right, let's actually create a file for a actual form. So you're going to inherit from your form base, which is great. Or you're going to import it and then inherit from it, I guess I should say. And so this is the account form. And so it's going to take the main form account to get the context and the form attributes and the form controls. If you are, there's a couple different ways to do this. You can create a separate form file per form, or you can create one file that's used on all the forms. I've rarely run into an instance where it doesn't make more sense to me to have one TypeScript file that I use amongst all the forms, rather than trying to do it one per each, because that just seems like a lot of potential duplicate work. So in order to do that, the simple thing is to just join together the other form name here as well, union type it. So to say account.main. Is that main information maybe? Would be the name of the other form in formation, if I could type formation dot account. So yeah, if you do that, then you can access a unioned list of all of the attributes and controls and form context for it. So that's how that works if you wanted to do that. So we have a static onload. This is just the actual, entry point that you would have from the actual onload of the form. So that's what you'd set up and configure. I'll show you what that looks like near the end. And then it calls its own form load. So do some additional logic, but primarily the biggest thing it's going to do is it's going to call the initial load value here, and it does it in a asynchronous manner. So that way, if you are doing lots of work in the JavaScript file, it will not keep the form from loading, which is something that you can get into if you do a lot of synchronous work in the onload. So it does that for you, handles that for you. And so in this example here, we are setting the value on load a description to totally awesome example, because why not? So let's go ahead. I've already created those files. I will go ahead and move them over. If I can find the right. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Oh, here it is. Cool. All right, wrong command line. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy those files over into our project. And now we can see in our source file here, we now have our account file that I showed and the base file for it. And so in here, you could add, everything's IntelliSense here. So context set value, if you want to set another value, pick whatever value you want to hold here. Do not phone, and it's going to give you some options there as well. Do not phone. And it's going to be a Boolean here. So I'm going to say true, and we're good to go. So all that's in there for you automatically. And again, if you do silly things like have the formatting kind of messed up, again, that's where the autosave automatically formats all that for you. So you can make sure that you're consistent across everything, which is great. So, so that's the whole point of doing all this TypeScript generation, is to get to the point where everything's typed for you correctly and you don't have anything that you're going to miss when you're debugging locally or coding locally and not realize it till you deploy. So, okay. So that there. Testing. So a couple of things we need to do is we need to set up the just config, which is pretty simple. We use just for testing. And so let's just import file here. And so if I bring that in, okay, so that's right into the root file here. It's a pretty simple thing here. We can actually run npx just to run our test. And run the test. And boom, it's done. Oh, I forgot I actually brought over the test. Let's take a look at that as well. Oop. Actually, I'll use it from here because I think it might be a little easier to see. So here's a test spec. So everything's going to have that spec in there so it knows it's the actual test file. We are importing the form here. So it's going to be the account form we're importing. And this is the mocking library that we're going to use to help to mock the actual form itself. So this is the extension that I wrote as well that it'll go through. It adds some mocking definitions so that way it can go through and basically generate out your in-memory in your actual unit test, the actual form itself. So you don't have to go through and say, this form has this attribute, this form is that attribute, this form is this attribute, this type. It just looks at the definitions and says, okay, this is your form, here are all the types. And so that way you can make sure that you've got type safety in there. If you happen to remove an attribute from the form and regenerate your TypeScript definitions, your unit test will fail if it has a dependency on it. So that's that. And then this is the form extension library that I use as well for that's created from the XDT form extension. So, so this is our test here, profile form test. First thing, I'm getting the context. So it's going to be the main account as well as the form attributes and control. So that's my context. The form is the account form, which we imported from up here. And so this is what we're actually be testing. And then as our before each, this will run every single time before any other tests that are below it. So the first thing it does is it generates the form in memory, the mock in memory, basically, based on this file. So it says, okay, I'm going to go and find this file here, the account definition TypeScript file, and I'm going to generate a form based on that definition. And then we have the account form itself that we are then passing in that page to actually generate the actual form. So this is like the thing I want to test with. We call the, or we wait for the on initial load to load. So that's going to go ahead and load that. And then we set the context to be used below based on that form context. And finally, at the end here, we have our actual test. So on load of the form should set the description to totally awesome example. So that was the thing. So it's, again, this is all IntelliSense here of, hey, get value. Normally, you're actually underneath those covers, it's going .get attribute value, .get attribute dot get value. But again, that the helper method here just say, hey, context get value, and returns that value for it and compares it to see, hey, does it equal or not equal? So that's just a simple test to be able to validate the attribute. And again, you can put whatever logic you need to in there as well. So okay, so that's the test itself. Let's talk about deploying code. You could do plain old JavaScript files, which means when you compile it, rather than doing Webpack, it just compiles to a file per TypeScript file. And then you are going to be responsible for going through and actually setting up the dependencies and making sure that you're including all the files that need to be added to the form. So if you've got 6 files, we have the base file, we've got a couple other files, you have to go through and do all that stuff. And if it's out, and if it's, so you can set up dependencies within Dataverse itself per form or per file, which works okay. But if it's used outside of the form.js, then you're not gonna have that as an option. So that kind of doesn't help sometimes. So there's also dynamic loading. I actually liked this back in the day. So this was like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. I was using require.js to dynamically load the files, and it seemed to work really well, and I didn't have to worry about packaging anything, and yeah, it was pretty slick. But no one uses that anymore, so I assume that there's something wrong with it. I haven't used it, so now I use Webpack, which I think is kind of older, but there's other ways to do it. But so not everyone's doing it, I guess, but I'm doing it, so maybe that's okay. But basically, at the end of the day, it's going to go through and analyze your file and combine all the other references that you need into one file per form. That's the idea. So, there are some config files that you include. There's a shared, so I have a shared, a prod, and a dev. So if you want to generate it with the most smallest footprint, then you want to use the prod. And if you want to use it, maybe the most easiest to read, then the dev would be the one to do that. in my GitHub project there, you can go ahead and see some example Webpack files in there to use for that. And it'll assume that particular folder structure for setting that up. So, and then once you generate that, you will then need to deploy that. And the way I have it set up, and the way I'll walk through this, is actually going through and adding them to the actual or importing them using the Web Resource Manager. So I just take the Web Resource Manager in the XM Toolbox. I go to the Web Resources folder. I open that folder, and then I add it to the file to the solution or whatever I need to do in order to get that to work. And remember, every single, like if you've got 6 form TypeScript files, each of those are going to generate a JavaScript file that is web-packed into its own file that contains all the dependencies. So, but only the dependencies that it needs. And so those will be, so you just need to add that one particular file to the form, and it's going to have all the other dependencies it needs in that single file. So you don't have to worry about this file loading out of, before that file loads and this dependency loads. It'll handle all that for you. And the other key thing to know is that you can configure that to bring in the mapping files and the TypeScript files. So what happens is, by default, the TypeScript will generate JavaScript files that are not easy to read because they're not designed to be easy to read. But with the TypeScript files and mapping files included, when it sees that, it'll actually, the browser actually take that and it'll show you what the TypeScript file looks like. And when you're debugging, it'll actually debug the TypeScript file, even though it's the JavaScript file that's actually running. So a really, really useful and neat feature for that. So let's go ahead and bring in my Webpack files here, and then we'll go through and walk through those real quick. All right, so we have Webpack config.dev, prod, and shared. So basically that each of these files is using the shared, so the shared's the same, and the dev, the only difference is, hey, it's going to be develop mode, minimize is false, and prod, it's production mode, and so it's going to minimize the files. So there are some changes you will need to make in here from time to time. For every single form that you want to generate a file for, you'll need to include it in this array. To say, okay, I want to generate an account form. Right here, if I had a contact form, I'd have to add that as well. If you're doing some like custom web resource page, you would want to set that up here, and then ribbon, you'd set that up here. And the reason that we set them up separately is because they get generated into different folders by default. So this logic is just going through there and figuring out how to generate those, and the naming the type space for those as well. And so you'll see that at the end here, we'll actually show the file path that'll be used. And yeah, it does it for the forms, the page, and the ribbon. And then in here was, well, this is really painful trying to figure out how to get this to work, but this is the parts that make sure that gets put to the correct folder in the actual project, so you can then easily upload it. And also setting up the XM query library stuff, that's a little bit more complicated. So there is you had to have this Webpack provide plugin to go through and actually grab those files and include those as well, potentially. So, so that's the setting. So normally you should only ever have to touch these 3 things at the top. Each time you add a new file that you want to generate, you just go in and type the name of it, and it should be good to go there. So, yes. So using those settings, it will generate the name of heck.form and then the actual name of the form, account.form, and .onloads. I think you actually see that in here. Yep, so there's the heck, there's the form, and then it will, and then it's the slash form. Yeah, F is for each forms. Yeah, that may actually be account rather than a form account, but I think it's account. I think it's form account form. So, and then the onload. So that's the one that will go through and then call the base, the actual base file, base function. There we go, to go through and actually load it on the initial load. So I also have it configured to pass in the name of the form too. So that way, if you do happen to have the same JavaScript file running against multiple forms, you know what form it is being used under. So that could be helpful in those situations. So. But that's basically all the setup that you'd have to do. And then I add in the, I just use the registration at runtime to register all my change events and stuff like that. So, and I did that again. Cool. And then so the final section here is just scripts. So scripts are what you can put in your npm file to actually not have to type everything all over again. So here's an example of a couple scripts that I've added. Format for formatting. I don't necessarily use that because it automatically will do that. But hey, if you wanted to, you can do that. Same thing with linting. For regens, if I want to regen the form, that this command will go through and do that for me. I got to fix that. It's wrong. But look at the versions. Those are older versions. For testing, you can do things for that as well using Jest. You can also do the test watch, which allows you to be able to test things in real time, which is really sweet. Build dev, build for prod, and then starting a dev server as well. So let's go ahead and bring in those script changes here. So this goes in your package JSON, scripts, cool. So now, rather than having to remember all this crazy stuff, you can just do npm run test. And that runs your whole testing library. The cool one is npm run test watch, and that will automatically configure it to check for any changes and automatically rerun the tests. So if I go back through, I go to my account form and I say, hey, it should have exclamation point. And I save that. You'll see now we have an error down here of, hey, it failed because I saved that. So if I go back and save it again, now it reruns. So it's going through and rerunning those tests on the fly. And they've made that faster than the last time I looked at it. It was about a second before, and now we're looking at 0.267 seconds to go through and run that. So it makes it super nice if you ever try to do test-driven development. Something that really wasn't possible without this, and it makes it super easy to be able to go through and test things on the fly, make sure you don't break anything, especially on larger projects. It's a really nice feature to have. And then also the one that's helpful as well is if you need to rerun the whole, hey, I need to regenerate everything, npm run regen, and then that'll go through and run the XM definitely typed to create those definitions again. And then at the end of that, also run my own library to go through and generate those extensions as well. So boom, done. So makes life fairly simple once you've set it up and gone through that pain. Hey, now your life's easy and you've solved all the world's problems. So. What have we done? We have typing for every form that you configure. So if you want to say, I want to do for this entity or that entity, you configure that. And when you do that, you get every single attribute that's on the form, every control, even the groupings of it as well, the tabs and the sections as well. You also get the typed context functions as well to be able to save yourself some null checking and keystrokes to say, hey, context set value and get value. We also show that, hey, we've got mocking for the testing. Actually, did I show? So if we go back and I attempt to do a different one here. So if I do context dot get value and I type in something that doesn't exist, it'll yell at me because, hey, this doesn't exist. And if I want to put in something, I can put in whatever value I want for the actual value itself. So yeah, it makes life really nice when you're doing testing as well. Have all that IntelliSense in there. So it's both the actual coding and the testing is all typed. And then there is typing for the web API as well. That one I still kind of struggle with sometimes. Is it worth it or not worth it? But it's available, and there's a lot more documentation for that under the XM definitely typed GitHub library if you want to check that out. So that is everything I was planning to cover. So here's some of my information. If you want to reach out and connect, feel free to. If you are connecting on LinkedIn, just add, hey, I'm on LinkedIn, or hey, I watched you cover TypeScript, and now I know where you're from. I like to know how I know everyone on LinkedIn. So those are my ways to get a hold of me. So any questions or anything I can go over again, or anything that we want to discuss, I'm happy to stay.
That was awesome. Great presentation. Do you have, we've alluded a couple of times to how painful it is to set this up. So do you have a project, like a sample project that I could download from GitHub that has, basically everything except for your secrets in it?
I can just go ahead and give you all the command lines that I've ran. For that. And then I need to give you the actual folder itself, and you'll have to fix where the command lines are. That makes sense?
Yeah.
But me go ahead and just add that to the chat here if I can
Yeah,
do
that'd be
that.
wonderful.
Yep, cool. Because the only thing that's all there. Great. Okay, so that is like all the command lines and stuff that I copy pasted in, just to make your life a little bit simpler. And then I'll go ahead and grab the actual files that I used for that as well.
Nice.
Any other questions? Why hunt and look and find that?
For the folder structure, did you set that up to kind of mimic how the files would be in the web resource manager from the XRM toolbox? Like,
Yeah,
they align with each other?
So it's just the web resource manager. Open up the web resource folder. So if I go back to here, so the code that actually gets generated, if I build, run build. I probably should have shown that. Web resources. So you open up web resources, and then that's their solution. JavaScript form contains the actual JavaScript file and the mapping file for it as well. So you can configure in the there's an option setting in the web resource manager to include the mapping files if they exist. So you just load that folder and import it, and you're good to go.
Okay. Is it if I wanted to change how they came out? So, like, if I have an existing project that I kind of want to work this into, but the structure is like, slash web resources slash prefix slash scripts slash table name. So instead of like JS slash form, it's just one different one. How, as somebody who's not familiar with the project, how easy would it be for me to hunt down those and make those updates?
Just to say, hey, I want them to generate in these other places rather than that place.
Yeah, well, yeah. So instead of like JS slash form, just scripts.
Yeah. So that's just in here.
Got it.
So it's source form. Where's the JS at? That's the page for that one. That's the page for that one. Forms. It's in this file.
Okay.
Yeah, right here. Yep. So the path is resolved into this thing. So you just update that to be whatever you want to be based on your directory. So.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep. And I can't add a file to this. I can't upload a file to that. So.
Okay.
I'll have to see about what I have for. See if I have a way to do that. Contact me. I'll happy to send it to you one off.
Cool. So. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you have any other questions for anyone?
I have.
Go ahead,
not
David.
A question, but a comment, real quick. If you're not following Daryl on his XRM Toolcast, you should. It's the best. It's the most content, at least fluff, podcast out there. Thanks for all the good work you do, Daryl. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm sorely behind, and I think we've done it for like 3 months. Having a high schooler just sucks all the time out of life. As far as I got to drive here, I got to drive this, and then I have 2 other kids too. So. She gets her license next year. It's my oldest. So once she gets her license, I hope that kind of like, okay, now I have to spend 10 hours a week being a chauffeur, me and my wife. So, yeah. Thanks, Dave. Someone else was talking? I had a question.
Yeah, Daryl, good presentation. Appreciate it. I'm really new to this. So we use a CRM built from a model-driven Power App. And so just a really basic question. We've basically only used the quick create forms and the basic forms in a basic model-driven app. Mm-hmm. This is a way to, from VS Code, quickly create like custom forms for different workflows.
So you don't create any forms for this. It's looking at your org and then it's generating the TypeScript definitions for the form that you've created. So as you add attributes to the form, they'll show up under your TypeScript definitions and you'll have IntelliSense for them. Does that make sense?
So this whole interface is to edit the forms that already exist?
So you're not editing any of the forms. You go in, create the form wherever you want to create the form. Now, okay, I need some JavaScript to run on this form, to do something on this form. Then you use this to get, what is your form definition? What are the attributes on your form? What are the controls on your form? And so it doesn't change the form definition in Dataverse at all. It's just defined, all those values are defined. So that way, when you go and actually want to code against it, you don't have to guess, oh, what was the name of that attribute? Did I add that attribute? What's the type of that attribute? Because depending on the type, it's going to give you different values back, and you have to handle that appropriately. So it should make your developer speed of developing JavaScript for those forms much faster. That's the goal.
You're creating the bridge basically, so it communicates and decreases the amount of work you have to do.
Yeah, it's basically being able to, because everything's in the cloud, right? It's being able to bring down everything to your local machine, and you can code against that rather than just guessing what the values are. Because if you spend much time at all doing JavaScript development for a model-driven app, I guarantee you're going to spend hours upon hours. Oh, I missed this bug. Oh, I missed that bug. Oh, I did this. And so this is trying to remove a lot of those bugs that are really common to those types of things, as well as add some unit testing as well, which is something that I don't think I've ever walked in on a project and saw. No, I had one project. I saw one project where they did some unit testing, and it was ugly, but they did it. It was better. Nothing like it. But I mean, I think the unit tests were like, the form itself was like 300 lines of code. The unit test was like 2,000 to 5,000. It was crazy.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and I didn't call that out, but here's like a quick create form. So this is like the difference between the main and the quick create form. So you'd have different attributes on this form versus that form, and so it won't show you quite as many. So the quick create just says the owner and the primary contact and that kind of stuff. So that's the quick view, I think, rather than quick create. But anyway, yeah.
Very cool. Have any other questions for Daryl? All right, wonderful. Daryl, anything you want to promote anywhere, well, besides your toolcast? Anything you're speaking?
No, I don't have any speaking engagements. So I guess if you want me to come speak, let me know. I don't have a whole lot of. All my presentations are canned. Like the I organization service hasn't changed since 2011. So much of my stuff is like, no one's excited about it because it doesn't have AI and stuff. But like, if you're like a new developer to it, like my Atlanta, I could save you like years worth of work because like everything's there. It's all done for you and make your life easy. Yeah, just using early bound generator tool for your C# and this stuff for TypeScript and all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, make your life a lot easier.
All right, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Daryl. Thank you for your time and sharing with us. Thank you, everybody, for spending your afternoon or evening with us here. We're going to be taking a break for the summer, but we look forward to seeing you all back here, hopefully in September or whenever we get together again next.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Bye.
Okay.